One decision can end every mind game an avoidant has ever used against you. There is a silent battle happening inside thousands of relationships every single day. One person reaches out, the other pulls away. One person searches for answers, the other becomes colder. One heart keeps hoping, the other seems impossible to read. It feels confusing, it feels unfair. After a while, it even starts to feel personal. That is where so many people become trapped. They believe they are losing because they are not loving enough. They believe one more message, one more explanation, one more chance, or one more sacrifice will finally break the wall standing between them and the person they care about. But that wall was never built by your lack of love. It was built long before you arrived. That changes everything. Because the moment you finally understand what is really happening beneath the silence, the distance, the mixed signals, and the emotional push and pull, you stop reacting the way they expect. And something extraordinary begins to happen. The game starts falling apart. Not because you become colder, not because you become manipulative, not because you suddenly stop caring, but because you finally discover the one thing avoidance cannot predict. And when they cannot predict you anymore, the entire emotional dynamic changes. Most people spend years trying to understand the avoidant. Very few spend time understanding themselves. That is why they stay stuck. They wait. They overthink. They replay conversations over and over inside their minds. They search for hidden meanings inside every text message. They wonder why someone who once seemed so close now feels emotionally impossible to reach. The answers never come, at least not the answers they expected. But before I tell you that, stay with me, because what comes next will completely change how you see this. There is a truth almost nobody talks about. Avoidants are not always playing games on purpose. That may sound surprising. Sometimes they truly believe they are protecting themselves. Sometimes they disappear because closeness feels frightening. Sometimes they convince themselves that distance is safer than connection. Yet none of that changes the pain you experience. The silence still hurts. The uncertainty still keeps you awake at night. The emotional distance still leaves you questioning your worth. That is why this conversation is not about blaming anyone. It is about freeing you, because freedom begins the moment confusion ends. Most people will never hear this, not because it is hidden, but because they stop too soon. They stop after hearing simple advice. They stop after hearing someone tell them to move on. They stop after hearing empty motivational quotes that sound comforting but never explain why this cycle keeps repeating. You deserve more than comforting words. You deserve understanding, real understanding, the kind that allows you to walk away from emotional chaos without carrying bitterness inside your heart. By the end of this journey together, you will understand why avoidants withdraw even when they care. You will discover why chasing almost always strengthens the very behavior you are trying to change. You will learn why emotional independence creates a response that emotional pursuit never can. Most importantly, you will see why the greatest power you possess has nothing to do with convincing someone else to choose you. That realization changes lives, because the strongest person inside any relationship is rarely the loudest. It is the one who no longer depends on another person's behavior to feel valuable. That kind of strength cannot be faked. It cannot be borrowed. It cannot be performed. It is built quietly, one decision at a time, one boundary at a time, one moment of self-respect at a time. There is also something much deeper happening beneath all of this. Many spiritual teachers have spoken about the energy people bring into relationships. Psychology explains attachment patterns. Spiritual wisdom speaks about self-worth, inner peace, and the quiet confidence that comes from knowing your value without asking someone else to confirm it. When these two worlds meet, something remarkable becomes visible. The relationship stops being only about another person. It becomes a mirror. Every fear, every insecurity, every hope, every attachment, every expectation, everything hidden inside begins rising to the surface. That is why avoidant relationships often feel so intense. They are exposing something much greater than the relationship itself. They are revealing where healing is still waiting. That might not be the answer you expected, but it may be the answer you needed. Because once you understand this, you stop asking a different question. Instead of asking, "Why are they doing this to me?" you begin asking, "What is this experience teaching me about myself?" That single shift changes your entire future, not only with avoidance, with everyone, because people who know their worth become impossible to manipulate for very long. They stop negotiating for respect. They stop chasing temporary attention. They stop confusing emotional inconsistency with love. They finally become the person they were searching for inside someone else. And that is exactly where the mind games lose their power. The surprising part is that this transformation often creates reactions you never expected from the avoidant themselves. Some become curious, some reach out, some begin questioning their own patterns, others disappear completely. Either outcome becomes a victory because your peace no longer depends on their decision. That is real freedom. That is real power. If these words already feel as though they are speaking directly to your heart, then you are exactly where you need to be. Welcome to the channel, where we explore the hidden psychology of human behavior, emotional healing, and spiritual transformation. If this journey toward peace, wisdom, and personal freedom speaks to you, subscribe and become part of this growing community, because the understanding you are about to discover may completely change not only the way you see avoidance, but the way you see yourself forever. The strangest part of an avoidant relationship is that the moments which keep you attached are often not the loving ones. They are the confusing ones. That sounds backward, yet it explains why so many intelligent, emotionally aware people remain trapped in a cycle they cannot fully understand. Do not skip this part, because this is where most people make the biggest mistake. Emotional inconsistency has a quiet power. One day there is warmth, the next day there is distance. One conversation feels deep and genuine, the next feels cold and disconnected. Your mind begins searching for reasons. You replay every message, you question every word. You start believing that if you can only solve the mystery, the relationship will finally become stable. Without realizing it, your attention shifts away from your own peace and toward predicting someone else's behavior. There is a lesser-known psychological fact that explains why this feels so addictive. Research into intermittent rewards has shown that unpredictable rewards can create stronger attachment than consistent ones. It is the same reason people continue pulling the lever on a slot machine even after repeated losses. The uncertainty itself keeps hope alive. In relationships, occasional affection mixed with emotional distance can create the same subconscious cycle. It does not necessarily mean the avoidant is planning this. Often they are simply acting from their own unresolved fears. But your nervous system still responds to the unpredictability as though another reward could arrive at any moment. That is why mixed signals are so powerful. They leave just enough hope to keep you waiting. One thoughtful message erases weeks of silence. One affectionate conversation makes you question whether the distance really mattered. Your heart holds on to the best moments while quietly ignoring the painful patterns surrounding them. Little by little, waiting starts feeling like love. Chasing starts feeling like commitment. Anxiety starts disguising itself as deep connection. If those feelings sound painfully familiar, there is nothing strange about you. Many people blame themselves because they cannot understand why they cannot simply let go. The truth is that your heart is responding to uncertainty, not weakness. You were searching for consistency in a place where consistency did not exist. That realization is not meant to create anger. It is meant to create freedom. Here is the truth nobody says out loud. You were never broken. You were never lost. You were always exactly where you needed to be. The relationship was revealing something far greater than another person's behavior. It was revealing the places where your own need for certainty had become stronger than your trust in yourself. Everything begins changing the moment you stop asking, "What are they going to do next?" and begin asking, "Why does my peace depend on knowing?" That single question quietly breaks the invisible cycle. It shifts your attention from chasing answers to rebuilding your own center. Then something unexpected happens. The avoidant notices a change they cannot immediately explain. Not because you became louder, not because you became colder, but because you became less predictable. Avoidants often feel safest when they know exactly how someone will respond. If they withdraw, they expect pursuit. If they become distant, they expect reassurance. If they disappear, they expect waiting. These reactions create familiarity, and familiarity feels safe, even when the relationship itself is not. The pattern becomes almost automatic. The moment you stop reacting the way they expect, the emotional rhythm changes. You no longer rush to fix every silence. You no longer measure your worth by their attention. Instead of acting from fear, you begin acting from inner stability. Emotional independence carries an energy that cannot be forced. It quietly communicates that your life continues with or without another person's approval. That does not mean becoming emotionally numb. There is a profound difference between detachment and emotional maturity. Detachment often says, "I do not care." Emotional maturity says, "I care, but I will not abandon myself." One is built from avoidance, the other is built from self-respect. That difference is impossible to fake, and people feel it long before they can explain it. And what I am about to share next, nobody talks about this, but it changes everything, because the greatest shift does not happen inside the avoidant first. It happens inside you, and once that begins, the entire relationship starts operating by completely different rules. The moment you stop explaining yourself is often the moment everything begins to reveal itself. That sounds almost impossible to believe because every instinct tells you that more communication should solve the problem. Yet the opposite is often true. Do not skip this part, because this is where most people make the biggest mistake. When someone keeps pulling away, the natural response is to explain more clearly. You try to prove your intentions. You carefully choose your words. You send longer messages, hoping that this time they will finally understand your heart. But endless conversations rarely create lasting change when the real issue is not a lack of information. The issue is emotional readiness. A person who is not prepared to face their own fears will often hear the same words over and over without truly receiving them. There is a surprising psychological reality that very few people recognize. The human brain naturally fills silence with its own assumptions. When you constantly explain yourself, you remove that space. But when you stop chasing understanding, reality begins speaking louder than your words ever could. Your absence from the usual pattern forces the other person to experience the consequences of their own choices instead of being distracted by your efforts to repair everything. Silence is often misunderstood. It is not punishment. It is not manipulation. Healthy silence is simply refusing to rescue a situation that another person keeps creating. It is choosing peace over endless persuasion. It is trusting that truth does not need to shout in order to be real. If you have spent months trying to convince someone of your value, those words may touch something deep inside you. Many caring people believe love means constant effort. They believe giving up explanations means giving up on the relationship. But real love never asks you to abandon your dignity. There comes a moment when protecting your inner peace becomes the most loving decision you can make for yourself. Here is the truth nobody says out loud. The more desperately you seek validation from someone else, the less you notice the validation you are withholding from yourself. That is why peace often speaks louder than words. A calm heart sends a message that endless conversations never can. It quietly says, "My worth is no longer waiting for your approval." Something remarkable begins happening after that shift. The emotional pressure disappears. You stop monitoring every notification. You stop measuring every delay. You stop wondering whether your value changes because another person became distant. That quiet confidence cannot be manufactured. It grows naturally when your identity is no longer tied to someone else's behavior. And that is exactly when the avoidant often begins feeling something unexpected. When your attention is no longer constantly available, the emotional landscape changes for both people. The familiar pattern disappears. The certainty that you would always be there slowly fades. For someone accustomed to emotional distance, that change can feel surprisingly uncomfortable. Not because they suddenly lose all fear, but because the relationship is no longer following the script they expected. One lesser-known fact about human behavior is that people often notice stability most clearly after it is gone. Constant availability easily becomes invisible. Genuine self-respect stands out because it cannot be controlled. Confidence that comes from inner peace does not argue. It does not compete. It simply exists. That is why it becomes impossible to manipulate. Many avoidants eventually begin facing something psychologists sometimes describe as an emotional mirror. Without your constant pursuit to distract them, they are left alone with their own feelings. The silence they once created now reflects back toward them. Some become curious. Some begin questioning their own patterns. Some even reach out, not because they suddenly became different overnight, but because they are experiencing the relationship without the familiar safety of your chasing. That does not guarantee reconciliation, and it should never become your goal. The deeper purpose is that you are no longer acting from fear. Whether they return or remain distant, your peace stays intact. Ironically, that is often the very quality that changes how they see you. And what I am about to share next, nobody talks about this, but it changes everything. Because the greatest mistake is believing your mission was to transform them, when the real transformation was always waiting to happen within you. The greatest mistake is not loving an avoidant. The greatest mistake is believing your love alone can heal wounds they have never chosen to face. That belief feels noble, it feels compassionate, but it quietly becomes a prison. Do not skip this part, because this is where so many people lose themselves without even realizing it. When someone keeps pulling away, your heart naturally wants to close the distance. You become more patient, more understanding, more forgiving. You tell yourself they just need time. You believe that if you remain kind enough, loyal enough, and available enough, they will finally feel safe. But healing does not happen because another person sacrifices more of themselves. Healing begins only when the person carrying the wound decides to face it. This is a lesser-known truth supported by years of psychological understanding. Lasting emotional change almost never comes from external pressure. It comes from internal readiness. No amount of reassurance can permanently remove fears that someone is unwilling to examine. You may comfort them for a moment, but comfort is not the same as transformation. That realization can feel painful because many people confuse love with emotional labor. They begin carrying responsibilities that were never theirs. They become the therapist, the rescuer, the emotional protector, and the constant source of reassurance. Slowly, the relationship stops feeling like two people walking together. It becomes one person carrying the emotional weight for both. If you recognize yourself in those words, you are not alone. Many deeply caring people believe that walking away means they failed. They believe choosing themselves is selfish. Yet every healthy relationship depends on two people taking responsibility for their own healing. Love can support growth. Love cannot replace it. Here is the truth nobody says out loud. You were never responsible for saving another person's heart. You were only responsible for protecting your own. The moment you accept that, something inside you begins breathing again. The pressure to fix everything slowly disappears. You stop measuring your value by how much pain you can tolerate. You stop believing suffering is proof of love. Then something remarkable happens. You begin choosing yourself, not through anger, not through revenge, not through emotional walls, but through quiet self-respect. You wake up without checking whether they replied. You spend time building your own life. You invest your energy where it grows instead of where it constantly disappears. That shift changes more than your daily routine. It changes your identity. Boundaries become a natural part of your life, And boundaries possess a remarkable quality. They reveal intentions without arguments. People who genuinely respect you will adjust. People who only benefited from unlimited access to your energy often resist. Either response gives you clarity that endless conversations never could. The relationship no longer depends on your willingness to ignore your own needs. It begins depending on mutual respect. If that respect cannot exist, the truth quietly reveals itself, not through conflict, through consistency. The deeper lesson extends beyond psychology. It reaches into something spiritual. Every relationship carries an invisible exchange of energy, not in a mystical sense alone, but in the way emotions shape the atmosphere around us. Fear attracts more fear. Desperation often attracts distance. Calmness invites honesty. Self-respect encourages respect from others. The energy you consistently project becomes the standard you quietly teach people to follow. That is why self-respect transforms interactions without demanding attention. You stop negotiating for kindness. You stop explaining why basic respect matters. You simply become someone who naturally expects healthy treatment because you first offer it to yourself. Many spiritual traditions describe life as a mirror. Whether someone sees that metaphorically or spiritually, the principle remains powerful. The relationships that challenge you most often reveal the beliefs you still carry about yourself. If you secretly believe love must be earned through endless sacrifice, life may continue presenting situations that invite you to question that belief. Avoidant relationships often become one of those mirrors, not because they were meant to punish you, because they were capable of revealing what still needed healing inside. That changes the entire story. Instead of asking why this person entered your life, you begin asking what strength this experience awakened within you. Suddenly the relationship becomes more than heartbreak. It becomes a teacher, a difficult one perhaps, but a teacher nonetheless. And then comes the freedom that almost nobody expects. Letting go no longer feels like losing. It feels like returning home. You stop carrying questions that never had satisfying answers. You stop waiting for perfect closure. You realize that closure is not something another person gives you. It is something you build through acceptance. Acceptance does not erase love. It simply removes suffering from love. The day the mind games end forever is rarely the day the avoidant changes. It is the day you stop participating in the game. Because every emotional game requires two people. One creates the pattern, the other keeps responding to it. The moment your responses change, the cycle loses its foundation. That is the real reason avoidants stop playing games. Some stop because they recognize they can no longer control the emotional rhythm. Some stop because they begin confronting themselves. Some never stop at all. But none of those outcomes define your future anymore. Your greatest power was never changing them. It was changing the relationship you had with yourself. One surprising truth about emotional healing is that the human mind experiences uncertainty as more painful than rejection. That is why so many people spend years chasing explanations instead of accepting reality. Once you release the need to know every answer, your nervous system slowly discovers something it may not have felt for a very long time. Peace. Real peace. The kind that does not depend on another person's text message. The kind that survives silence. The kind that remains steady whether someone returns or walks away forever. That is not emotional survival. That is emotional freedom. You no longer wake each morning wondering whether someone else will choose you. You wake knowing that you have already chosen yourself. And from that moment forward, every relationship begins from abundance instead of fear. And what I am about to share next, nobody talks about this, but it changes everything. Because the final lesson has nothing to do with avoidance at all. It has everything to do with the person you become after walking through this fire. The greatest victory was never making an avoidant stay. It was becoming the kind of person who no longer loses themselves when someone else chooses to leave. That is the journey you have taken through this conversation. You began with confusion, searching for answers about someone else's behavior. Along the way, you discovered that emotional inconsistency creates invisible cycles, that chasing rarely creates closeness, that silence can carry more strength than endless explanations, and that true confidence is not something another person gives you. Most importantly, you discovered that your peace was never supposed to depend on another person's ability to love you the way you deserved. That changes everything, because the moment you stop trying to control another person's choices, you finally reclaim your own. The one decision that permanently breaks unhealthy emotional cycles is surprisingly simple. Choose yourself without punishing anyone else. Protect your peace without becoming cold. Love deeply without abandoning your own needs. Set boundaries without carrying guilt. Walk away from emotional games without carrying anger. That is not weakness. That is wisdom. Many people spend years waiting for closure to arrive through one final conversation, one perfect apology, or one last message that explains everything. But real closure is much quieter than that. It arrives the day you stop asking another person to unlock a door that has always been in your own hands. From that moment, something beautiful begins to happen. You stop attracting relationships based on fear. You stop confusing uncertainty with passion. You stop believing that love must always hurt in order to be real. Instead, you begin creating relationships where respect feels natural, honesty feels safe, and peace becomes the foundation instead of the reward. That is emotional freedom. And emotional freedom is one of the greatest gifts you can ever give yourself. Everything you just heard, you already knew. Deep inside, you just needed someone to remind you. There is a quiet strength already living within you. It has survived disappointment, confusion, heartbreak, and silence. It is still there, waiting for you to trust it again. The more you listen to that inner voice, the less power fear has over your future. One day, you will look back at this chapter of your life and realize it was never sent to break you. It was preparing you to become someone who no longer settles for anything less than genuine love, mutual respect, and inner peace. Before you go, hear this one last thought carefully. This might be the most important message in this entire video. The person you have been waiting for to change your life has been with you from the very beginning. Every step you take towards self-respect changes the direction of your future more than anyone else's choices ever could. If this message spoke to your heart and helped you see yourself a little more clearly, I would love for you to subscribe and join this community. We are building a place for people who want to understand human psychology, grow spiritually, heal deeply, and live with greater peace. If this video encouraged you, leave a like so it can reach someone else who may need these words today. Until we meet again, keep choosing your peace, keep honoring your worth, and never forget that the strongest relationship you will ever build is the one you have with yourself.